At 2:13 a.m., Buddy slammed his shoulder into the bedroom door so hard it cracked the frame. Michael sat bolt upright. Sarah's breath hitched beside him. There was no alarm, no smoke, only the low hum of the house and the night pressing at the windows. Buddy, 50 pounds of rust and cream rescue mutt with a shepherd's eyes, shoved through the splintered gap and launched onto the bed, nails scrabbling, chest heaving. He didn't bark. He pressed his nose hard against Michael's cheek. Then Sarah's, then leapt off, trotted 2 steps toward the hallway, and looked back with a stare that felt like a hand closing tight around their hearts. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, already swinging her feet to the floor. Buddy didn't answer, couldn't answer, but he stamped once, urgent, and bolted out. Michael grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and followed, pulse booming in his ears. The beam jumped across picture frames and the soft lump of their 10-year-old daughter, Grace, asleep on the couch at the top of the stairs. She'd insisted on camping there with a book and a blanket. Buddy paused, planted himself against the couch and pushed his head under the blanket like he was trying to pry the child free from sleep itself. "Grace," Sarah said, voice shaking. "Sweetie, wake up!" Grace stirred, blinking, curls wild around her face. Buddy nosed her hand, then jerked his head toward the stairs. Down below, a metallic tick sounded. So small, so ordinary, that Michael wouldn't have noticed it if the dog hadn't gone still as stone. Tick. A pause. Tick. Gas. The word flashed in Michael's brain like a flare. A storm had rolled through earlier and rattled the old oak in the yard. Maybe the ground had shifted. He didn't smell anything yet, but Buddy did, or felt it, or heard the mute language of danger this house had started to speak. "Shoes," Michael rasped. "Coats. Now." Buddy moved like a shepherd at the heels of sheep, herding Sarah and Grace down the stairs, blocking, nudging, correcting their path when Sarah, in her panic, veered toward the kitchen. When Michael rounded the corner, he saw it. The pilot light on the stove had gone out. A thin hiss sighed into the room, invisible as a lie. He spun the knob off, flung open the back door, and the house exhaled. They stood in the cold on the back steps, breath pluming, the branches of the oak hissing like whispers. Buddy paced between them, head high, body taut, that same stare moving from face to face like he was counting and recounting, refusing to relax until they were all there. Sarah's hands shook. She pulled Grace into her arms and kissed the crown of her head, then looked down at the dog. "Okay," she whispered, tears bright. "Okay, Buddy, we hear you." Buddy had arrived 3 weeks earlier. A quiet shadow padding out of a shelter run by a woman named Janet, who spoke of him the way you speak of old photographs. Carefully, like they can tear. "He came in with no name," Janet said, rubbing the dog's neck. "Just this old collar and a look that, well, you'll see. No aggression. Eats gently from your hand. Watches everything. We think he used to work." "Work?" Michael asked. "Search and rescue, maybe. Or some kind of service training. He knows how to open gates and he listens for things. Like he's never off duty." She paused, scanning the kennel rows. But then something happened. He's got a healed scar along his rib, and when he gets near loud banging, he trembles. He'll still go forward, but you can see him bracing. The shelter felt like a place where stories paused between chapters. Grace stood slightly behind Sarah, fingers curled in the hem of her mother's jacket. She'd been quiet since the accident 3 months ago, silence wrapped around her like a coat, withdrawing farther each day into a country where words were rare. The accident hadn't taken anyone, thank God. But the memory of headlights, refolding a fender, and the crunch of metal and the horn that wouldn't stop had pinned itself behind her eyes. And it had taken her voice. Buddy walked to Grace as if an invisible line had tugged him. He didn't lift a paw, didn't lick. He simply sat down and set his weight against her shin. Grace's hand slid from Sarah's jacket and into his fur like it belonged there. "What about his name?" Michael asked, throat tight. The dog lifted his head at Michael's voice. The shelter name on his tag read Buddy, a placeholder that fit him the way jeans fit when they've been worn by 100 different people. Not perfect, not wrong. We can keep it, Sarah murmured. Or he'll tell us a new one later. They signed the papers. Buddy stepped into their lives the way he'd stepped against Grace's leg, quietly, with weight and intention, and the house rearranged itself around him. He learned the creek's curves in the hollow behind the yard, the squeak in the third stair, the precise minute the school bus sighed to a stop 2 streets over. He slept beside Grace's bed, belly against the floorboards, and whined softly when nightmares thrashed the blankets like waves. He'd get up, plant his paws, and press his head onto her chest until her breath slowed. He was a dog, but he was also something else, an instrument tuned to danger or grief, or whatever electric thing flickers in a house after a family has been shaken. They learned his odd habits. At 5:17 every afternoon, he trotted to the end of the driveway and sat, scanning the street. If a siren rose somewhere in the distance, he'd stand, chest high, eyes narrowing, then relax when it slid away. When the dishwasher clicked off, he appeared in the doorway, as if the house's subtle noises were a language he was translating for them. Once, when Sarah dropped a mixing bowl, Buddy went rigid, and then, with effort, forced himself forward to nose her knee, shaking like walking through an old, invisible pain. He did something else, too. He brought Grace back. The first sound came a week after he arrived. Grace had built a fort of blankets and books under the dining table. Buddy had crawled under and trapped himself, on purpose, by lying across the exit like a boulder. "He's stuck," Sarah said without thinking. Grace's head popped out. She tried to move Buddy, grunted, and, soft as a match catching, laughed. The laugh sounded like wind chimes in a house sealed for winter, and it made Sarah's knees wobble. By the night of the gas leak, Grace had started to hum again, then whisper. She said Buddy, like it was a secret that tasted good on her tongue. 2 days after Buddy woke them at 2:13 a.m., rain settled over town and stayed. The creek behind the house fattened and darkened, tugging at its banks like a child testing a boundary. Michael watched water lap at the underside of the footbridge and set sandbags along the back fence. Buddy patrolled the yard, tail and arrow, eyes flicking to the door every time he lost sight of Grace for more than 10 seconds. They found the first twist in that rain. 1 street over, a boy went missing. It was small news at first. He had been playing in his yellow slicker. He liked worms and pockets full of rocks. The school sent a robocall. A neighbor posted a wide-eyed plea. Then the police cars came, lights spraying red across the gray. Volunteers fanned out with ponchos and flashlights. Sarah made cocoa for the ones who knocked and handed out towels that came back soggy and smelling like creek water. Buddy didn't pace. He paced with purpose. He kept going to the back gate, pressing his nose to the latch, then staring at Michael and jerking his head toward the creek. "You think—" Michael started and stopped. It was absurd, trusting a dog's intuition over the map of assigned search grids. Buddy stamped both front paws, a sound like a small drum. It felt like an answer. Michael grabbed his boots and a flashlight. "We'll check the storm drain culvert by the old mill," he told Sarah. 15 minutes. The culvert was a black mouth at the edge of the park, where water shouldered through in a corrugated rush. Buddy pulled like a sled dog as if an invisible rope had looped his chest. Twice he stopped, ears lifted, and turned his head sideways as if listening to a radio only he could hear. Then he lunged into the brush beside the culvert and disappeared. "Buddy!" Michael crashed after him, branches whipping his arms. The beam of the flashlight bounced off metal, then water, then God yellow. The slicker, a small hand clutched a root. A small face, streaked and spattered, rose out of shadow. The boy wasn't in the main flow, but in a pocket where the current twisted back on itself, a trap decorated with weeds. Buddy had wedged his shoulder against a rock and pushed his body into the stream like a brace. He had the slicker in his teeth, not yanking, not risking a tear, just holding. Michael slid to his stomach, reached down, and grabbed the boy's wrist. "I've got you," he said, voice low and held together with breath. "We've got you." Back in the street, when the boy's mother screamed and folded her child in, Sarah pressed both hands to her mouth and cried. Buddy shook himself, sent a glitter of rain into the air, and stood quietly while 3 different people tried to kneel and hug him at once. The news called Buddy a hero, Emma from the local paper took a picture of him with the rescued boy's socked foot tucked beneath Buddy's chest. Comments bloomed like fireworks. Someone wrote that a dog had pulled their grandfather from a snowbank in 1969. Someone else said they'd never believed animals could have callings until now. But fame is a strange animal. It comes with a shadow. An online stranger asked why a family would risk keeping a rescue dog around a child. Another picked at the idea that Buddy had found the boy. Maybe it was luck. Michael closed his laptop and went outside to throw a ball for Buddy until his arm hurt. Out there it was just rain and breath and the slap of paws. That night, when the water, swollen with all its new ambition, clawed at the creek banks, the second twist fell into place. The back fence gave way with a crack. Water rushed the yard. The footbridge bowed and then crumpled, a spine snapping. The yard became a river. Then the street became a river. A siren wailed not in the distance but right overhead, a loud, insistent ribbon threading the storm. "Upstairs?" Sarah called, gathering flashlights. "Grace!" They found her at the window that faced the yard. She was staring at the place where the bridge had been, eyes huge and shocked, like she had lost a word mid-sentence and couldn't find it again. Buddy threw himself between Grace and the glass like a guard. His body thrummed with energy. He was a live wire disguised in fur. He looked at the window, then at Michael, then at the hall stair. Sequence, cause, consequence. The house groaned. Michael felt it through his feet, a tremor traveling the bones of the floor. He grabbed the emergency backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and nodded. Go. They laced themselves into the dark like beads on a string, Buddy first, then Grace with one hand in Buddy's ruff, then Sarah, then Michael. At the landing, a sound cut through the storm, wood screaming. The oak in the yard, the one that had stood longer than the house, was coming down. They didn't see it fall. They felt it, a punch to the earth. The window behind them exploded inward, a spray of glass like ice in a gale. Buddy took the stairs 3 at a time, then skidded at the front door. The water had reached the porch. Moving outward through the back would be suicide. Buddy swung his head toward the garage, then to the side door that opened onto the narrow strip of yard between houses where the land lifted slightly. He pressed his shoulder to the door, braced, and shoved. Michael piled his weight next to Buddy's and heaved. The door gave, water snatching at their shins. They waited, knees bumping, grit grinding against skin, the storm clawing at their clothes. Buddy angled them toward the neighbor's stone steps, the highest point within reach. Twice Grace stumbled. Twice Buddy planted himself and took her weight like a rock. They reached the steps, climbed, and collapsed under the eave, pressed close and shivering. It wasn't over. A voice carried, a man's voice, gagged by water, begging. The neighbor, John, lived alone. He'd been the one who shoveled their walk in the last snow without being asked. Michael surged to his feet, but the water had changed its mind again. It dragged at him with both hands. Buddy didn't wait for permission. He plunged back in, shoulders going under, head lifting, eyes bright with that steady, terrible focus. He swam the way he'd moved through the house at 2:13 a.m., deliberate, direct, answering a call only he could fully hear. He found John by the blooming shape of a tool chest that had tipped and pinned the man's leg. Buddy grabbed the strap of John's jacket and pulled, teeth bared not in anger but effort. Michael fought through the current, got his hands under the edge of the chest, and together, man and dog, they shifted it enough for John to wrench free. They hauled him to the steps. Sarah yanked blankets from the emergency bag and wrapped them around John and Grace, hands moving with a calm that was the only thing holding the night together. Buddy shook once, staggered, and leaned against Michael's leg until the tremor in his shoulders eased. In the morning, the water stepped back the way an animal does when it realizes it has come too close. The street shone with silt and lost things. The backyard looked like a stage after a play, broken set pieces. The creek's altered script scrawled in mud. The local station aired a shot of Buddy sitting on the neighbor's step. Head high, mud splashed to his chest like war paint. The anchor's voice softened as she described the family pulled from the flood, the neighbor saved. "A rescue dog changes a family's world," the caption read. It wasn't just the house Buddy had changed. That afternoon, when the sky finally wrung itself out and the quiet felt fragile, Grace tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Dad?" Michael stared at her. It was the first time in 3 months she'd put that word into the air. She pointed at Buddy. "He's brave." The word stretched between them like a wire humming with current. Sarah pressed her fingers to her mouth. Michael swallowed and nodded, eyes burning. "He is." Grace shuffled to Buddy, sank to her knees, and wrapped her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his fur and whispered clearly, "Thank you." Buddy sighed and set his chin on her shoulder, as if the whole point of his life had been to hold this child's voice while she learned to lift it again. Weeks later, when the footbridge was rebuilt and the creek relearned its gentle language, a woman arrived at the front gate with a hesitant smile. She wore a jacket stitched with a small patch. "Sayar K9. I'm Lily," she said. "I saw the news about your dog. He looks familiar." Buddy walked out onto the porch and stopped dead, as if the past had just stepped out of the shadows. Lily's smile tilted, eyes glossing. "Is that you, Scout?" she whispered before catching herself. "I'm sorry. We called a dog like him Scout once. My partner. He was injured on a collapsed building search. He recovered, but he never fully came back. Too jumpy for the chaos. We placed him with a family. The records were lost in a move. I saw Buddy's picture and I thought..." She crouched and patted her thigh. Buddy's ears twitched. Lily said a command so soft it was almost a breath. "Check." Buddy's head turned, scanning the porch, the yard, the street, the way he always did, but with a crispness that made Michael's arms prickle. Lily stood and swallowed. Even if he isn't Scout, he's trained. He didn't forget. He just needed a new kind of work. They made coffee. Lily told stories. A dust-choked warehouse, a missing hiker found by a nose pushing through ferns. She described the way working dogs change when they're off duty, the way their eyes soften, how they lean into the people they choose. Buddy curled at Grace's feet, letting her trace the healed line along his rib. He looked up at Lily now and then, as if listening to a song from long ago. When Lily left, she paused at the gate. "Some dogs find people," she said. "Some find the thing that's missing inside people and carry it back." She smiled at Grace. "He found your voice, didn't he?" Grace nodded. "He did." Buddy didn't care about titles. Rescue dog, hero dog, Scout Buddy. He cared about the work. And the work, as the house settled back into itself and the town hammered away the flood's rough edges, looked like this. Waiting at the end of the driveway at 517 just because. Circling back to nudge Grace's hand into her mother's on the first day back at school. Lying in the doorway of the kitchen while Sarah cooked, ears ticking at the polite conversation of the appliances. Jumping up when the neighbor kid's new skateboard cracked against concrete and trotting over to make sure the laugh that followed was a real laugh and not a cry. The world had changed for the family, because Buddy had changed the way they moved through it. They listened more. They watched the small things. They kept go-bags by the door and practiced their route to the neighbor's stone steps like a game. Grace made a poster for the classroom safety board that read, "Listen to the quiet things. They warn you." On a soft evening lit like honey, they gathered on the rebuilt bridge. The creek stitched silver lines between the stones. Sarah ran a hand along the rail, now stronger, anchored deeper. Michael stood with an arm around Grace, who leaned into him without flinching at the sound of a car taking the corner on the road beyond. Buddy lay with his paws crossed, eyes half closed, as if the bridge were a porch that belonged to him. "Do you think he knows?" Sarah asked. "How much he's changed us." Michael looked at Buddy, at the calm weight of him, at the way his ears ticked toward their voices. He smiled. "I think he knows what matters." Grace knelt and pressed her forehead to Buddy's. "You completely changed our world," she said, each word clear and careful, like a gift. Buddy huffed, rolled onto his back, and offered his chest to the sky, silly and proud. The moment felt so ordinary it looped back around to holy. Sometimes a rescue dog drags you from water or wakes you when the house is whispering danger. Sometimes he leans against your leg until your heart remembers how to beat steady. Sometimes, if you are very lucky, he does both. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.